and welcome back to Bonn here. I'm pleased that we've been joined by Carstensen of WWF. You're the leader of their global climate work. I guess the first question, Kim, is that your reaction to this, the new text that's come out today?
I think the text has some problems, and we've seen some quite negative reactions from some countries. I think what's good about it is that it's not only one side of the equation who react negatively. We see sort of negative and reactions and concerns from all sides, which to me points to, well, this is maybe not so far off, in fact. I think we have some problems, but I do believe it will be possible to actually remedy that and make sure that by the start of the next meeting we have a good basis to negotiate on.
And that's a relatively optimistic take compared to certainly the kind of the narrative coming out of Bolivia this morning with Pablo Salom. We saw his press conference saying that this text is a step backwards. We also saw Martin Kor, I think, say that the text removes the equity principle and from the most important elements of the climate regime. So there's been some vigorous criticism of it already, and yet you appear hopeful that we can move forward.
I mean, I think the general tone of these 2 weeks in Bonn have been that we want to move forward. And I don't see that parties will actually sort of completely give up on that hope and that movement that has been seen to happen. They're not resolving the really big, difficult issues. And what I think we're seeing here is some fighting that needs to happen right now. But I think it will be possible to find a way forward so that when the time we come to the next meeting in Bonn, we will actually have something that we can negotiate on. That does not mean that everybody agrees, not at all. I mean, there'll be huge disagreements inside that, no matter if we have something that everybody thinks is a starting point. Be huge disagreements, and they need to be resolved. And that's going to be the real difficulty.
A big challenge is yet to come then. I guess one of the specific criticisms that's been made is that this kind of Copenhagen Accord Plus is how the Bolivian ambassador described it. Said that there's no reference to the Kyoto Protocol. There's no guarantee that the two negotiating tracks are going to be kept separate, which is obviously a vital interest for many of the developing countries here. Is that a deal breaker, do you think, or is that something that you envisage being resolved?
I think there's a way to resolve it, and I think it will be resolved because, I mean, we saw last year, before Copenhagen, how this whole issue of killing Kyoto was the big conflict point, and there are ways in which that can actually be resolved between now and the next meeting in August, and I think it will be. I'm not surprised that Bolivia says this. Bolivia is dead against the Copenhagen Accord. I think it is a starting point for a discussion. It's certainly not the solution to the world's climate problems, but I think it is a starting point for a discussion, and I think that has to be recognized because there are other countries who have the diametrical opposite view from Bolivia's view. They think the Copenhagen Accord is the thing, and we need to make sure that there's a room for them to fight that out on the substance and not on the formality.
So working on the basis that your hope that there is room for this issue to be resolved, working on the basis that is true, what's the way forward here? I guess we have a few hours of negotiations to take place, possibly into tonight, and then what needs to be achieved by then, and then we've got the G20 coming up, further talks in August. What are the milestones we need to be looking for in terms of making sure this process is successful? Well,
we need out of this meeting to have a clear picture of where we're going to be when we start in the next session in August, and we need to know exactly how we're going to get there, and that needs to be so clear that what we have is a negotiation text. It's not just something that you'll then spend the whole week discussing whether we can negotiate on this basis or not. That has to be clear, and that's really important out of today. And then the big issues need to come to the table at the meeting in August, and we need to find clarity and resolution on some of these. One of them being, what's the legal form that we're moving towards? Is it a continuation of the Kyoto Protocol? Is it something else? Is it both? And that needs to be resolved. Otherwise, we're never going to get where we need to go.
And do you think that's something we'll achieve by the end of today? We'll have a text that people are willing to take on in August and start working with.
We'll either have that, or we will have the process by which this text that we have now will become that by the start of the August meeting.
Okay, and just to look at some of the other milestones, you mentioned the G20 just before we came on air. What hopes do you have for that as a venue for moving this whole climate change issue forward?
Well, I think we have, in the long run, I think we have some very interesting opportunities with the G20. I'm quite confident that the Korean presidency of the G20 and the summit in Korea in November is going to produce something interesting on low carbon or green economic development, whatever we call that beast. I think the French presidency next year has a good chance of moving on finance, financial transaction taxes and that kind of stuff. The first meeting we're going to have is the one in Toronto in late June. Canadians are doing whatever they can to prevent meaningful outcomes of that meeting, so my hopes are not big for that one. But I really think it's important that we have the voices of civil society, we have the voices of climate change there, demanding that it happens and making sure that it then gets embedded in the process going forward.
And we've been discussing about the role that civil society can now play at these talks, and the fact that a huge movement was built up for Copenhagen, and then you have kind of this post-Copenhagen hangover, and I think people were utterly exhausted by the whole circus, if you like. What scope is there now for activism to push this forward? Should people be working locally? Is the UNFCCC the venue that people should be seeking to apply pressure at? How do activists move on from here?
I think it's always necessary to work locally. I think if you don't have your basis in order in terms of what happens in the countries, what happens in provinces, in cities, in companies all over the world, if that basis is not there in terms of seeing solutions, making progress, making things possible in real life, then countries will never be able to get together in forums like this one and say, okay, we can actually do more than you thought. We can do this because we have the example. So I think that grassroots movement at the local and national level is crucially important. And that then needs to be the basis for us as civil society to also come together at the global level.
And just finally, before I hand back to the studio in London, the next kind of two big meetings as part of the UNFCCC process is Cancun in Mexico in December, and then the subsequent year in South Africa. What needs to be achieved there as far as you're concerned? Where are we headed now?
We need to see a really clear package of actions and solutions coming out of the meeting in Mexico in December, where we get clear agreement on issues like reducing emissions from deforestation, like adaptation, like finance, and get a package out of that, plus a completely clear picture of what is the legal form that will be the climate regime going forward. It may then be that the final agreement on that thing is going to be in South Africa, but we need to have a very clear and strong outcome of Cancun.
And if we don't have an agreement on this regime in Cancun, is there a future for the UNFCCC?
We need the UNFCCC in any case, and it may be a long-term fight, it may be a short-term fight. The world needs it to be a short-term fight and us to get a result soon, quickly and strong. But if we don't get it, we will still continue working at the national level, creating solutions with governments who want to move, governments like South Africa, like Mexico, like Brazil, like China, like many European countries who really want to move, and we need to make that happen. And that can then be the basis for stronger agreements sometime in the future, but we need it actually now.
Okay. Kim, thanks very much for joining us. It's been interesting to talk to you, and I'll hand back to Anurada and Jeff in the studio in the UK. Thanks very much.